Hey guys, Tyler here. As some of you may remember, this past January, I uploaded a video on my channel about the prematurely canceled Star Trek Enterprise and its unproduced 5th season. In that video, I discussed 7 of its potential screenplay pitches, many of which actually got pretty far into pre-production. These included an encounter with the Kzinti, more adventures of Flint the Immortal, and the fate of the mysterious humanoid figure, aka Future Guy. However, what a lot of you might not have known is that there's actually an 8th screenplay pitch that almost made it into the video, one that would involve the residual effects of the temporal Cold War, and so-called realignment of the Prime timeline, with one quirky character at its center. Today, I'll examine the details of this undeveloped screenplay pitch and said episode's potential effects on the franchise as a whole. Let's get started. There are extremely scant reports of this storyline on the internet, and I only found out about it through my script editor, Subraxas. But I figured it would be worthwhile to entertain the prospect that had Star Trek Enterprise been renewed for a 5th season or beyond, this episode potentially could have been produced. Let's dive in. In 2004, when Manny Coto became one of the executive producers of Enterprise and its de facto showrunner, alongside veterans Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, among various other tasks, he set out to deal with some of the canon and continuity inconsistencies that had irregularly popped up in the show's preceding seasons, particularly its first 2. As the story goes, he conceived a sort of cleanser episode that would take advantage of the so-called Prime timeline restoration, as seen in the double-parter and Season 4 opener, Stormfront. The episode would start out with the NX-01 crew undergoing some mundane mission, at least mundane by the standards of Star Trekking explorers, and the ensuing situation would call for a meeting of the ship's senior staff. At the meeting, Dr. Phlox would pitch in his 2 cents, suggesting that the crew take advantage once again of the cloaking technology acquired from the Suliban some 4+ years earlier in Broken Bow. However, this idea would have resulted in the crew's confused, disbelieving stares, absolutely not knowing what Phlox was talking about. Phlox would consequently become confused as well over their reaction, while trying to clumsily explain in vain exactly what he had meant and remind them of the cloaking tech that they had at their disposal, that they supposedly had, that is. Yes, the crew would have been keenly aware of the captured Cabal cell ship, but no one would have any idea about this cloaking device that was attached, which would have turned out to be a huge WTF moment in the episode. One of several, actually. Commercial break. Right afterwards, the progressively more and more frustrated Phlox would continue searching for evidence and bringing up some of the crew's past adventures with the Suliban Cabal to hopefully refresh his crewmates' memories. He'd scour his medical records and bring up the case when Commander Tucker's arm had temporarily gone invisible due to some badly handled cloaking tech, occurring when he had been working with Ensign Mayweather on the cell ship in The Communicator. Yes, the records would indeed indicate that Tucker had injured his hand and forearm in the incident, but the given injury would have nothing to do with cloaking tech and invisibility. Furthermore, Phlox would reminisce of the time that the NX-01 became trapped in a Romulan minefield full of allegedly cloaked spatial mines, while being harassed by 2 Romulan warbirds, also cloak capable. Captain Archer, Lieutenant Reed, and of course everyone else would remember the life-threatening misadventure quite well. However, they would try to remind Phlox that the mines were in fact not cloaked, but instead made of some stealth tech that the Enterprise's sensors struggled to read. Similarly, Archer would play to the bewildered Phlox footage of the 2 Romulan ships captured by the Enterprise's visual sensors, only showing to him that the vessels in question were in fact not cloaked either, and on top of that, weren't even warbirds, but a completely different type of spacecraft. Furthermore, Phlox would ask the captain about the retrieval mission on the unnamed warp planet in the communicator, where, in accordance with his memories, the cloaked cell ship was used to save Archer and Reed from being executed. Archer would clarify that this was instead accomplished with a second shuttle pod and a barrage of spatial torpedoes detonating over the military compound, and in the process dispersing over the region a skin-penetrating, incapacitating agent, a high-tech sleeping gas of sorts that Phlox himself had synthesized, something of which he had no recollection at all. Such changes of events would not merely be restricted to events involving cloaking tech, however, as we would later learn that the Enterprise had not gotten hijacked and looted by a group of Ferengi in year 1 of their mission, but rather by a different species, likely the Orion Pirates. Although it should perhaps be noted here that this in-universe retcon wouldn't really be needed as much, being more fan service since this ragtag group never identified themselves to the NX-01 crew as being Ferengi. So this wasn't per se breaking canon by violating the 24th century first contact between the two species, previously established in TNG. But I digress.
You guys are what, some creepy throwback Last Outpost style Ferengi?
By now, some of you are probably saying to yourselves, this sounds quite intriguing and profound. It kind of reminds me of something. Oh, I know, yesterday's Enterprise. And yes, you would be correct on this one. Well, at least partially. In the given TNG episode, when the Prime timeline got temporarily altered, the arcane Guinan was the only one who did not conform to the imposed alterations. However, as opposed to Dr. Phlox, she was vaguely capable of perceiving the change herself, which the show's writers variably attributed to her being El-Orian or her having previously spent some time in the Nexus, which had endowed her with an insight into various timelines and universes. Unlike Guinan, Phlox wasn't aware of anything for over a year after the timeline's restoration, and only learnt of it thanks to, well, dumb luck, I guess. But you still might be wondering how come his memories didn't get altered like everyone else's did. Well, Manny Koto had allegedly planned to attribute this to Denobulan's unique brain structure and chemistry. It would be as simple as that, so no groundbreaking revelations here. As a whole, the two episodes would be quite different. Whereas in yesterday's Enterprise, Guinan was only one character in a multi-layered, large ensemble outing, the potential Enterprise episode would have been heavily focused on Phlox front and center. It would have been much more of a character study and a great opportunity for John Billingsley to show off his acting chops. In the story, Phlox's claims would initially cause an air of unease amongst the crew, with their tentatively doubting Phlox's mental state at first. He'd begin to feel isolated and perhaps even betrayed, but not knowing by whom or what. His own mind, maybe? Both Captain Archer and Phlox would agree to conduct a medical examination that would ultimately not reveal anything out of the ordinary for our dear doctor. It would only take time for the captain to hesitantly arrive at a possible conclusion of past altered events, given his personal experiences with Agent Daniels in the temporal Cold War. However, the shared anxiety from not knowing what was going on would only be traded for not knowing what else could have possibly been changed. Some of you may be thinking at this point, well damn, that's a pretty interesting premise that could have made for a great episode. Plus it would have sorted out some issues with the in-universe continuity. So why didn't Tyler include it in his video about Enterprise's unproduced 5th season? Well, as I alluded to earlier, much of the evidence for this storyline comes from nearly decade-old internet forums that have been pretty much lost to time. It's uncertain whether this premise was truly conceived by Manny Koto, or one of his then co-writers, or is just some elaborate fan fiction. Hence why I decided to leave it out of my Enterprise Season 5 video, since I strive to be as factual as possible. Having said that, there seems to be a thirst among people familiar with the premise for this episode for it to have become a reality, as potentially it would have been a watershed moment for the lore and Star Trek franchise as a whole. And while I'm not personally sure if I would have gone this exact route in addressing issues with the temporal Cold War, I have to say that nonetheless it would have been interesting to see the reception of this Phlox-focused entry among the wider fandom. So what do you think about this premise? Has any one of you heard about it? If so, let me know down below. Before I go, one more thing. I'd also like to mention that the Prime Timeline restoration in Stormfront in the real-world year of 2004 was meant to firmly and definitively connect the events of Enterprise with all of the future shows and films from an in-universe chronological point of view. Therefore, I'm continually surprised, even though I probably shouldn't be, that lots of people seem to be missing the point, and instead regard the aforementioned timeline restoration as the exact opposite. That is, some sort of gateway or welcome to alter events in universe past the mid-22nd century. We've lately seen some examples of this with the writers of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, suggesting that the temporal Cold War may have resulted in changes that would override some of the previously established canon, particularly in the original series era in which they're operating. This has never been my interpretation. I have always viewed Enterprise as a direct prequel to the original series and everything that came after it. But this has been a divisive topic among fans for quite a long time, and it seems that the writers of New Trek are starting to take sides on this issue as well. As for how this continues to pan out in the future, well, we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, becoming a patron or a member is a great way to do so. Links to those, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper, and try not to mess with the timeline, okay?